Thank you. Technical difficulties, like any rock band first hitting the stage, you get the little feedback. But we're starting something called Unlock the Power of Thought Leadership, right? How to stand out in your industry. This is a thing that everybody wants to do. And it's not how to stand out in social media. It's not how to stand out in your group of friends. It's how to stand out in your industry and what that literally means. Okay. First up, I'm going to turn it over to Selby so she can introduce herself so you understand the weight of what's being said to you. Selby, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Oh, please mute yourself. There you go. Let's start that again. Selby, I'm rolling out the red carpet for you. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
You did roll out the red carpet. Nice to see some familiar faces here. I'm excited to be here. Phillip and I can go down a few rabbit holes and talk about thought leadership because we work in a very similar space. I know many of you through the Strategic Advisor Board. I'm Senior Vice President of the Strategic Advisor Board, but also I have my own business and I work in the content development space and really the program and course development space for consultants and coaches. And I also am CEO of a publishing industry. So the independent publishing is another way that you can get your voice out into the world. Speaker, author, and I basically help entrepreneurs create businesses out of their genius. So that's my background. Phillip and I know each other through the Strategic Advisor Board. I've done a few podcasts together. I have my own podcast called the Genius Entrepreneur Podcast. And Phillip's been on it once. I'll have to get him on again. So, Phillip.
Yeah, okay, right on. Now, as you know me, I come with a lot of energy, but I promise it all comes from a good place. As you can see in that photo, that's probably the most apt description of who I am, aside from anything I've ever done. I did work at a digital marketing agency in New York, and that's really where I cut my teeth. I started to learn all about the tools and sort of how we try to get ourselves in front of people and the good ways to do that and some ways that don't work at all that I still see being used every single day. And even when you know better, you don't necessarily do better, right? But I also did have the chance to be a part of a podcast that was on entrepreneurmagazine.com. And through that connection, I then launched one for Inc. magazine, but it was short-lived due to a change in CEO. However, that experience granted me the opportunity to do thousands of interviews over two. And I've then did another podcast shortly after that. They gave me an additional 500 interviews. It's a lot of interviewing, but it gave me an opportunity to learn a lot from people who are either raising capital, investing in companies by giving out capital, to small business owners and the general entrepreneur. And there's a certain mindset that came with that. Again, knowing better doesn't mean you do better, but you start to see some patterns, okay? And with that came this biography that I really picked up. Along the way, I got a chance to work with some great people, some of the people that are even on this call today, and things that I've learned watching them do what they do, right? So with that said, it's going to be a pretty straightforward situation in terms of the agenda. We're going to go into the definition of thought leadership versus personal branding. We're going to talk about when it doesn't work, or when people say that it's not working, what some elements may be that are attributing to that. We're going to talk about when it does work and why that's happening, what elements are actually contributing to that, how to measure progress, because that is probably one of the most important things. Most people don't invest in it, whether it's time or energy or resources, because they say, well, you can't really measure personal branding. In fact, you mentioned branding and people get really allergic really fast, but it's something that everyone who's actually succeeded has done, whether they did it intentionally or not. And they did invest in it, time, energy, resources. And then the general investment you might expect to make, it's just a ballpark, right? I just want you to understand the ballpark of the expenditure. Obviously, there's more than a one-time cost, and it's probably an ongoing thing. And we'll give you some examples of people that are actually doing that and how and what we mean by more than one-time cost or the ongoing cost. And then, of course, we'll talk about how Selby and I can help if that's something you're interested in. I want you to know the point of this is actually to educate you. Everything else is if you want it. We want to work with you, but that's if you want it, right? And then, of course, we're going to open it up for Q&A, and that's where all of you can come in. But before, don't just all of you start at once and turn on your mics. I'm letting you know now. Please let us know in the chat that you want to say something, and we'll bring you up one at a time. That way we can control the chaos. I think everyone who was invited to this is pretty aware of how easy a Zoom call can get out of hand really fast when there's a lot of people, especially one as personal as the one that we designed here, where it's not a webinar and it's controlled in a certain way. We're literally all directly connected to each other right now. So be mindful as we're here. Okay. With that said, I want to turn it over to the next slide, which is thought leadership versus personal branding. What the hell is the difference, and why the hell should you care? Right? Well, let's start by defining them one at a time. Thought leadership is the act of igniting meaningful conversations in your industry. Okay, let that sink in for a second. It's not a logo. It's not a brand guide with specific colors. It's not a business card. It's not a website. It can have those things, but it's not that, right? Think of the last time you had a meaningful conversation with someone. Honestly, think back to it. If you can in the chat, mention the time where you think you had a meaningful conversation about your industry with someone. Who was it that brought that up? Who sparked that conversation? Was it on social media? Really start to think about this idea, because that's what thought leadership is. It's having an opinion that taps into a current conversation and then dissents from it into an opposite, alternative, or different direction. That is the most basic definition of thought leadership. Everyone's thinking, and you're like, hey guys, let's think over here, right? That's the most basic definition of it. Let's go over to the next, right? So we know what thought leadership is. Let's hold that. And we have personal branding. Personal branding is creating the circumstances for others to consider inviting you to join and contribute to relevant discussions in your industry. Personal branding. So we have thought leadership and you telling people, hey, let's go here, let's go there. And then you have things that support people keeping you in mind for those relevant discussions. And that can be products, that can be services, that can be a number of things, but they are supporting. That's like a website. That's like a business card. That's like a brand guide. That's like social media content, right? So when we put them together, thought leadership versus personal branding is igniting meaningful conversations in your industry, while personal branding actively ensures that others invite you to join and contribute to relevant discussions. Is anyone unclear on that? Feel free to leave something in the chat if it doesn't make sense to you before we move forward, because I'm going to be turning it over to Selby in a second for a couple of examples of this. So anyone, if you're not unclear, okay. Now, if you are clear, just put a thumbs up in the chat so I know that everyone's clear. And if you don't want to do anything, fine. Just keep listening, because we're going to keep talking. All right. Okay. We're talking about examples of powerful thought leaders who are tried and true. You don't have to think hard. You don't have to be convinced. These people are clearly thought leaders, and they have solid personal brands. This is accurate, right? Now, usually I might start from left to right, but why don't we go ahead and turn it over to Selby, and she can break down some of the examples with Ariana Huffington or Elon Musk. Otherwise, I might just jump in on Coco Chanel. How you feeling, Selby? Oh, you're muted. Sorry. It looks like you're muted. No worries.
I am muted. Coco Chanel might be something that's, and Ariana Huffington and Elon Musk might be something that's out of the where we see ourselves. However, I think they're really good examples, and it's not like we couldn't be there. So I think that's something to think about too, is that it starts as something small and it develops. Ariana Huffington with the Huffington Post, she has built a personal brand about many different fields and contributing in many different fields of media and wellness and work-life balance. And she has all sorts of examples and of being a leader in this industry to raise these questions. She's leveraged her experience to be able to do that. Same thing with Elon Musk. though, who we all know as a successful entrepreneur, used his idea and is a leader in his industry, and an entrepreneur that we all know, secondhand information. We know who he is, we know what he does, we know what his whole drive is, and he doesn't dissent necessarily, but he pushes the conversation along. And I think in both of those cases, they're leaders in this area because their brand are tied specifically to what their mission is and tied specifically to the change that they want to make. And it's a very deliberate combination of the personal brand and the thought leadership. So it was just to kind of start, but the Coco Chanel example, Philip, probably has some good examples too.
Yeah, I know, and I love that you said that it does sometimes feel out of reach. And that's why I put in examples like Marie Forleo and Seth Godin into this as well. And we could have picked, almost anybody. I just tried to think universally because yes, Coco Chanel is legendary, right? We're talking about someone who at a time when women were expected to dress a certain way in society said, well, do we really have to? And would show up a lot more comfortable looking than most people were prepared for. So there was a dissent there. Right. However, over time, allotting resources began to create products and services that supported that dissenting conversation or that alternative route of thinking. She was leading the way with creating androgyny as a popular form of fashion, right? Taking jersey materials that were normally reserved for men and turning them into cloths, comfortable clothing, whether it was shorts or a certain dress made from that, specifically so that women could feel better about how they were feeling all day long instead of being kept up like this. And so there was this entire movement in terms of thought, the discussion she was having. If you watch any interviews, it doesn't take very long to see where she stood on things. And that's the most important thing, is you have to be able to be seen clearly for what you stand for immediately. And that takes work. You got to workshop that. It's, you got to understand what's relevant to your actual story in your industry with your discussion. You don't tell people in your industry, I ate pizza yesterday and well, I love pizza and pineapple wasn't a thing on pizza. And it's like, oh, controversial. No, you have to have something relevant to your industry. She happened to have a very strong opinion about what people should be wearing. And in particular, people of her gender. Right. And so at that time, there was a lot that was being challenged. Doesn't mean your thought leadership has to be challenging, but it does need to lead by example, and it does need to take the conversation a step further. That's the whole point, is everyone's thinking about this. You can't lead in a vacuum, right? So if your idea is so original, your opinions and your values are so original, they're not even part of what's currently being discussed, you're not leading anything. You might get followers and eventually lead something. Let's take a look at the example of how hard it's been for cryptocurrency to actually move forward. Yes, there is a cult following and some people follow it all the way to the bank and some follow it out of the bank, losing a lot. But that is really alt culture, right? And yeah, you can look at numbers, but in terms of like how many people are there, but it's not mainstream. It really isn't. It's not a current conversation that everyone is willing to have. And if you want, the more people can have that conversation with you, the more people you can lead. So keep that in mind while you're doing that. Whereas someone like Marie Forleo, one of my all-time favorite businesswomen out there, and I'll tell you why specifically in current modern times. She used to coach with Tony Robbins' foundation company. And as she was looking to expand further, think of anyone who's at their job and goes, oh, I got to do something about, where I'm at and where I'm going to go. And so she decides, I'm going to be a business coach, but I'm also going to be a hip hop dancer. Right. And I'm also going to be focused on teaching women and everyone around her who was smarter, successful, whatever, quote unquote, would say, well, you should, you would, I would, you could. All about limiting and narrowing down and being niche and that whole thing, right? So there we go. There's a conversation happening. And what does she do? She says, no, you can actually be all things that you want to be. It's like, okay, well, put your money where your mouth is. What do you mean? So there's that thought leadership, right? There's that first thread. And here comes the products and services to support it. So then she invents B School. B School is a particular cohort designed retreat program where women can sign up, get an education in developing a business model, defining their value proposition. But get this, the retreat aspect is they go off into some fun place. It depends on where she feels like doing it that month or that year. I think it's annual. And then they learn hip hop dancing to develop, self-confidence, leadership skills, teamwork skills, but also the entire business education. So tell me again how you can't be all the things that you want to be. You're only limited specifically by what you believe is possible as a business model. There is definitely someone probably in this group right now, participants, that would love to go to a hip hop class that then breaks down the fundamentals of business development, business planning, and value proposition design, all together looking to support each other on the journey as you build your business. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a good time. And that's what Marie Forleo did. And that's not all she did. Then she combined it with Marie TV. Okay. Now I want you to keep in mind here. You're looking at people who are saying, hey, build your personal brand, build your thought leadership. I'm planting the seed now. And you're like, how much you want for this website? How much do you want for these headshots? No, I can do it myself, right? Because we're all entrepreneurs and we're like, no, I'm going to do it myself. Or I'll find, I'll go to Fiverr or I'll go, great. As long as you don't mind managing all that on your own. Fine. Marie Forleo, on the other hand, knew better. She can't do B School and then Marie TV, which is quite literally just the Oprah Winfrey show, but on YouTube. And she really did do it. She's even had Seth Godin on a few times. I'm pretty sure she had Ariana Huffington on. Don't quote me on that, though. She's had many people on, and there are video editors, graphic designers, right? Visual effects people. She's got hair and makeup. She's got a whole fashion team that she brought on, right? So she's got all that. And the editors on top of that for the audio podcast version. The list goes on, the social media team. You think that's do it yourself? No. And you're like, yeah, but she's a successful businesswoman. Was she? Because she started off as a coach working for somebody else. How do they do it? Right?
It's really, if I could, Philip, it's really, I think that's such a great story of you can decide what your brand is and you can decide the impact that you want to have, but then really living it and creating a business out of it and investing in all of those different areas. That's what I think, how you make that connection between that. And I think that's why they're really good examples of that. Elon Musk is the same way, had this whole new thought leadership about being outside the box and electric cars and space travel and all that. And he not only had that thought, and that was part of his part of his social media, part of everything. And he tried to involve everybody in the conversation, but he also put his money where his mouth is, right? Like he invested in that. He also invested in entrepreneurship and probably didn't do it all alone and understood that he needed to have some resources around him to support that mission. So just to add something to the comment.
100%. And so same thing, right? When someone's thinking of having a conference or having a small group meeting about, let's say, empowering women in business, do you think Marie Forleo is a relevant person to invite to that conversation? Same thing with Elon. If somebody's talking about interplanetary space travel or maybe even building on external planets besides Earth, or let's just talk about how to leverage electronic type of transportations. Like, we thinking of developing an electric airplane instead of running on fuel. Do you think Elon Musk is a relevant person to invite into that conversation? Yes. Why is that the case? Right? Well, if you look at it, the odds were totally against anything he said he was going to build. And on top of that, it's all like woo-woo, like what? Live on another planet? Well, yeah. Well, first we're going to have to be able to bring back our spaceships, not just launch them, hit the planet, and then, break off into a small little ship and get back. That's literally, there's no way at our current state that we're going to be able to do that. But he's having the discussion, right? Same thing with Marie. She wants to empower more women entrepreneurs to step into fully who they are and lean on their natural ability to create communities and groups. And what does she do? She helped them bond with hip hop dancing. How many of you have a hobby right now that you're looking at and going, I'd really, it's, you can't make a living off loving to do this. Like, I love cooking, but I'm not going to be a chef, right? Who's going to pay me to be a chef? Plus, chefs don't make enough money. I mean, even after all the years that you work, no. What if you taught business while everybody learns to cook a recipe? And then when someone's talking about developing a new business model or a new unique value proposition, and you have that under your belt as an entrepreneur, I don't know. I really like the interesting way that they approach building their business. And that's only one of their businesses. And it involves a cooking class. Seems like a relevant person to bring into this conversation. In fact, I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day. I'm going to tag them in there. Why not? Seems pretty relevant to me. And what a different way of doing business. You want to be a thought leader in business? You can do it generically, or you can niche down, which is the only time that makes sense, to specifically what types of businesses do you want to be known in, and have that discussion. Shelby and I were talking about this the other day. There's someone named Amanda Natividad who is the CMO for Spark Toro, and I'll get into what that is, but it's a marketing tool. And she said between 0 to 500 followers, specifically from 0 to 500, you should be spending more of your time commenting, not liking, because you can like, but it doesn't mean anything, but commenting back and forth with people in your specific industry, building relationships. You should be spending more time at those digital dinner parties before you start posting content. But what do people do instead? I'm just going to create more content because it's easier, isn't it? It's just you and you're posting it into the vacuum and it doesn't matter. How many of you have spent at least 1 hour going back and forth with relevant people, not your friends or your family, on social media, people who you actually want to have a connection with who you don't currently know? Go ahead and drop a thumbs up or an yes, me, or whatever into the chat if you actually actively do that right now. Like at least 1 hour a week. That's not a lot, but at least 1 hour a week of actually spending time with people discussing things that are important to your industry.
Does that count business partners?
And that's the thing. Again, it's people. It's people that you don't currently have a relationship with. Yeah, it's important. How else are you supposed to expand the level of influence you have if if all you're doing is having relationships or conversations with people that you're already talking to? You're never a prophet in your own land. Everyone knows that. Think of any time you ever did anything amazing and then try to show it to your kids or your partner or your friends, and they're like, that's cool. Anyways, look at this other person who's doing exactly what you just did. Aren't they interesting? Happens all the time. Okay, this is why it's important that we actually take the time to be out there in front and center with people that are relevant. You have any thoughts on that, Shelby?
I know. I mean, it's just a good reminder to do that, to myself to do that. Because I think the tendency with entrepreneurs is that we tend to we're in our space and we have our immediate connections of the people with us, but then we don't want to talk to the competition, right? And so I think there's that immediate dismissal or like fear of that competition. And there's just I think as an entrepreneur myself, I have that whole idea, but then there's so much to be gained when you talk to somebody in the same industry and you can come together, your ideas just elevate. I mean, Phillip, you and I can spend, I don't know how many hours on the time just disappears because our thoughts just build on top of each other. It's the same thing, engaging these relevant conversations. But I think it's an important reminder for all of us entrepreneurs to think about.
Yeah, so and I see some people saying they actually spend some time, so something like 30 minutes or so. Some have openly admitted, and that's the first step, right? Admitting we have a problem that you don't. And look, everyone needs this reminder. It's not about who knows more or who knows less. You could be a chapter ahead and technically know more, but everyone needs this reminder because it's easy to get comfortable. It's safe. I remember reading somewhere, I think it was in a U99 book, where they put together a bunch of of thoughts from thought leaders, people who have dissented. And there was a quote of Seth Godin who said he used to self-sabotage a lot. And what he means by that is before he became Seth Godin, he would get in his own way because he knew that if he starts putting together things where he's saying that he knows what he's talking about, well, now every day for the rest of his life, he's got to know what he's talking about. And that's a whole lot to live up to, right? So maybe if I just play it safe and don't have an opinion about many things and kind of just like and post things and every now and then say, that's awesome, and then like and post and continue to build my network connections, maybe then somehow magically through the number of having more people that I like and more posts that I make, that someone's going to care about what I have to say that I'm not saying. No, it's not going to happen. You have to have relevant conversations if you want to be a thought leader. And not only do you have to have relevant conversations, but you have to prop it up with products and services, things that you do. Doesn't have to be a chocolate bar, it can be a podcast, it can be a newsletter. There are people who do love newsletters. I personally may not be one of them. And a lot of the times we hold others to the standard that we hold ourselves to. Just because you don't read a newsletter doesn't mean that others don't read newsletters. Some people love newsletters, and in particular, the newsletters that they love, right? So open your mind. For real. Keep an open mind when doing this, because if you can have conversations that are relevant, specifically to what you're trying to achieve and things that you know, and you can create opportunities for interesting discussions, there's the thought leadership aspect. And then you create products and services, or even opportunities like events, right? I consider that a product or a service. You can create and prop yourself up even further so that people can invite you to other things that are relevant. You have to give people targets to hit. Otherwise, you're not in the game at all. Okay. As Seth Godin says, good marketing only helps bad products fail faster. So a lot of you out there will go and get PR, right? You'll get on Forbes, you'll get on Entrepreneur, you'll get on XYZ. You'll have all these great things happening, but then you don't have anything to prop it up. That's really where Selby comes in, and she's going to help you productize all that. But you don't have anything to set you up for success. You cannot capture value. Some of you may have met the most amazing people in the world, have done work for the most amazing people in the world, but you've got nothing to show for it. Why? Why? Because you haven't kept your relationships that are relevant in the industry alive, right? Because at a very basic level, there are macro problems and micro problems in business, okay? And just going off script here a little bit. Micro problems are like, I need to develop a way to get my payroll met because it's that's all personal to you and your business, right? Unless you're in the macro of helping businesses ensure their payroll is met, right? These are problems that affect more than just you, okay? You need to know that the stuff you're talking about is something everybody is feeling. And that's the best part. Everybody's already having those discussions that you want to be tapped into. The question is, have you been looking for them? And have you been joining that discussion? Imagine you're at a dinner party or a networking event, and you're like, who am I going to talk to? And let's be honest, with a bad host, that's always the most awkward situation because they're not making the introductions to you. I don't want to put myself out there. All the things that make us human, right? But let's just say in this pretend world, you actually happen to have the confidence and the courage to be willing to have a relevant discussion with people. And you hear someone say, okay, let's say, for example, let's go back to Marie Forleo, right? Since she's a boss and she's walking around and for some reason, this party doesn't seem to know who she is, but there's somebody sitting there talking about, well, people are telling me that I should probably just niche down and let go of this idea of like having a cooking class as part of my my value proposition design workshop and like finding out what is the ingredient that made this dish the dish that it is. But, and everyone's like, yeah, no, you need to niche down. Like the last thing you need to be doing is thinking about bringing everything into a one thing and trying to be all things to all people or whatever. People start talking about, they start repeating what they've heard others say. And then Marie Forleo goes, well, actually, hope you don't mind if I interject. And I know you've seen these people on LinkedIn who put on to like a whole thing And you're like, oh my God. Anyways, your first reaction is to roll your eyes. But have you ever thought to take the time to look at what they're actually saying? Why would someone you think people just write for the sake of writing on LinkedIn? I'm not talking about those DMs you get that talk about, hey, you have a blue shirt. I have a blue shirt. Would you like a mobile application developed for your team? I can help you generate 16,000 more leads by the end of the month. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about people that are commenting and having a genuine discussion about what's relevant at a macro level in your industry. Don't roll your eyes the next time you see that. Step in and have an opinion. It's okay to have. Yeah, go ahead.
It's okay to have opinion for sure. And that's that's a great lead up. I just think about Jared Miller is here, and Jared and I have known each other, just to give everybody a little background. And Jared, I'm excited to have you in the conversation later. But Jared and I know each other from the world of collegiate debate. And Jared was a competitor, I was a competitor and a coach, and he's a coach and he still teaches. We both teach at the university level. And where we have these conversations, and relevant conversations, and we develop these skills, and we have all these specifics that we take a deep dive into topics, and we really explore all avenues around topics. And I have found, and Jared can agree or disagree with me, that all those skills are so necessary when it comes to business. And when it's communication based, when you're working with other people, there's an aspect, there is communication based, but I feel like sometimes we don't think of those skills. And this is not a criticism of debate. This is, I think, unique in almost any industry. We get in these communication habits and patterns and the way of doing business, and it stays in that business. It doesn't go outside of that business. It doesn't influence anybody else, even though it's really great skills and really important thoughts to go other places. And, you talk so much about Marie Forleo and how her brand is big and she influences a lot of people. She's not niched down into something. So when we niche down into something or keep those skills in an industry, and we don't think about the impact that those skills or those conversations can have out of the industry or the space that we're in, I think that's really where we start to think about the principles behind what we talk about and the principles in our brand and in thought leadership. And that's the opportunity to really connect with other people, because you are driving the ship in the direction it's supposed to go, but in a lane that it's supposed to be in. But you also want to be able to get out of that lane, and you also want to be able to influence other people or visit other islands, wherever, take the metaphor wherever you want, but you can be in a lane, but be open to going elsewhere too. And I think that's, all of us in our industries and with our skill set, we have developed these qualities that make sense in our business, but then we have to translate those qualities to the outside to be influencers in our business. And that's really where thought leadership is creating a movement and creating a transformation in how people think. And we do that in our industries. And then the challenge is to, how do we take that outside of just the place where we develop our business? So Jared, I'm excited to chat with you later in the Q&A. So
100%. I mean, look at the phenomenon of podcasting, right? I started back in 2014, and there are people who had started even earlier than that, right? And that was mostly on the production end of things. But just look at how it took off. In a world where people were talking about, the shorter the better, 30-second video clips. What Vine had like a 30-second, 10-second video clip thing before, the social media platform died or got purchased. And then we're talking about, 1-minute videos on Instagram. It's all short content. And yet podcast defies all current logic. The same way Seth Godin's always throwing in your face that whatever people are telling you to do in marketing, you should probably be doing the opposite, because that already doesn't work anymore. That's literally his thought leadership. Someone would go in and say, you need to start writing 62 blogs, specifically 62 a month. He'd say, or not. You could write one super blog. It really depends. You need to get people's permission, and that's through connection. And I'm not going to go into his whole spiel, but the point is, podcasting, right, defies all logic. Some of them go 3 hours long. There's a podcast out there called Sleep With Me. I think the guy's name is Scooter. All he does is create the most boring content on purpose, so that as he's talking, you literally fall asleep. And the guy has downloads. Okay. How is that thought leadership? Well, I don't know if you know this, but he has looked into sleep science. But is he going around talking about, oh, I'm a sleep scientist, and and that's his title on social media? No. But he's an evangelist for that macro problem. She understands that people have trouble sleeping. And the vehicle he decided to use to prop up his thought leadership happened to be a podcast that helps people fall asleep. That's like, what? Think about that. People overthink their podcast, right? Or they do what everybody else is doing. And I've been guilty of this myself. I'm going to have a podcast on podcasting, a business podcast where all I do is interview business people with no specific, clear objective. It's no different than someone coming up to you if you're in PR and saying, well, I raised some money, so that's the story. So put me on a magazine, feature me, cover me. No one cares that you raised money. People raise money every day. Why is your story different? Oh, well, we're a unicorn. Do you get to say that? That's like saying, well, I'm awesome. And I don't know if you've ever heard this, but people say that the difference between marketing and branding, right, generic branding, is that marketing is you going around telling everyone, hey, I'm awesome. And then branding is other people going out of their way to tell people how awesome you are, whether you're in the room or not, right? So it's the same thing as what we're talking about with thought leadership and personal branding. So let's reiterate that, right? Thought leadership is you tapping into relevant conversations, deciding what's relevant for you right now, and how can you make it more interesting, and how can you take people and invite people to discuss alternative viewpoints, where things are going to go, where things have been, and why they probably should still be there, or why, whatever your thought is on it, or where things are right now, but what people aren't seeing. How many times have you seen, you need to stop what you're doing now and look at this as like a clickbait for an article? I can't overstate that enough. You need to understand that part of thought leadership. And then personal branding, right? Having things prop it up. And we'll go into the development of all of that and further along. But I just want to know how everybody's feeling, because I'm seeing some notes here. It's 2 pages of notes. That's amazing. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm glad everyone's loving this. We've been trying hard. So one of the things that people really, really like to say is that this stuff doesn't work. Yet we just showed you examples, very clear examples of it actually having worked. Yeah, but it won't work for me. I don't want to get into that, but that is definitely a self-limiting belief. It's not saying that it's going to be easy, and it really depends on your goals and where you're trying to take it, but it can happen for you. It happened to other humans. If you're a human, it can happen for you. The trick is you've got to put in the work. And if you've been doing work and you're not getting any results, you're probably doing the wrong work. I'm not just going to sit here and tell you the obvious things, but I want to make that clear. Sometimes people say, yeah, well, it doesn't work. And it's like, well, have you looked at all the things that are maybe need to be taken into consideration to make it work? So there's a huge lack of awareness, right? You just by default, please stay muted, whoever that is. Okay. Yeah, if by default you're saying, if by default you're saying it doesn't work, that's not fair. That's not giving yourself a fair chance at all. If you're talking about budget constraints, that's totally understandable. Everybody's in different places in the world. Hey, look, I'm no different. Okay. You never know what people are going through. Totally understand that. Doesn't mean you can't do something to move the needle. And think about it. You can at least do that first half, which is actually having a conversation with people. That goes a long way. I'm having a conversation with you right now about things that affect all of us. How's that for meta inception, right? We're having a thought leadership conversation on thought leadership right now. And what we believe, what we agree. Someone out there in this chat likely has already thought of something interesting that neither myself nor Selby is currently thinking of. and they're already about to develop some whole other thing. I would bet money on that. I am confident that someone has already taken that to the next level. And then we're talking about the do-it-yourself mindset people, right? Entrepreneurs are notorious for this, and not the good ones either. If you've been to any business seminars, they often tell you the whole point of being an entrepreneur is you're supposed to work yourself out of your job as soon as you possibly can. But how am I going to control the quality, the consistency? I mean, who's going to replace me? I literally can't teach what took me 50 years to learn to someone else. Sure, you can't, but you can teach someone at least 50% of what you know and your guidelines, where the limits lie, right? And then you can push them a little further. And then you forget about what they might bring that you can't do. The 50%, the 100% they can't teach you, and how that's going to add to your element, right? I don't want to lose control. But when you do that, you stunt. That's another form of self-sabotage. After 2,500 interviews with business people, I can tell you that the ones that are the most successful love handing the baton off to somebody else. And that's even hard for me to do. Okay. I'll openly admit that. It's like, here, you do it. I'm not going to do it. And there's a refusal not to do it. And that's important. You have to get to a place where you decide for yourself, what am I not going to be doing in my day-to-day that I know somebody else has to do for me? And you don't always have to exchange money. It could be any number of things. If you've gotten this far, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thanks on that. I was just going to say, I think as entrepreneurs, as we all are, we operate in our creative space, and we come up with our best ideas when we can create. And then it's hard to kind of hand that off and hand some of those things off and then keep creating, but we can't keep creating and enter in a new space of thought leadership or discover more possibilities of what we offer unless we delegate some of that and to understand how it all works together with your brand and your goals and your mission. I think there's just a good reminder for all of us to think about too.
Absolutely. Again, open your mind. Open your mind. It's pessimistic to think that only you can prevent forest fires, right? Like, come on, you've got to open your mind. It's more than only you. That's an ego thing. That's inverted ego. And believe me, I've got plenty of it. Okay. I'm just as guilty as anyone else on this call. And it's the biggest learning curve. If there's anything out of those interviews I've learned, is the minute you learn to do that comfortably, by starting off doing it uncomfortably, the sooner things that you do will begin to expand. Quite literally, by the definition, +1. Okay. So keep that in mind. And again, more reasons why people say it doesn't work. Just in general, they're like, well, there's no really a return on investment. We just gave you a bunch of examples of people who, whether they did it intentionally or not, saw serious return on investment. Which you might.
And I think that's even hard too, because there's not an immediate return. It takes a while. You have to put the time in to be able to create that community and create that movement and influence the people. It takes time to do that. And not all entrepreneurs are patient, right? So
yeah, everybody was like, oh yeah, Marie Forleo decided to launch her B school. And then literally the next day, 82 people signed up. Oh, Marie Forleo decided, I'm going to do Marie TV, right? And then all of a sudden, video editors and people who hold boom mics and everybody just started magically appearing at their door. What do you think the story was really like? You know, what do you think that was really like? How long do you think it really took to get the pieces together? Obviously, when we see it, it looks like it's ready to go. That's called product packaging, right? It's yeah, it's important to understand that, like, the ROI thing, that it's going to take some elbow grease, as they say, right? There's going old school for you. Could put some elbow grease into it. Everybody do one of these.
Just the way you think about if you have a podcast, then how can you use that message and how can you use those ideas in different forums? And how can you create all of that? There's so many tools now to be able to do that. And Phillip, I know you're going to talk about that later, but there are ways to think about that. Like our barriers to being a thought leader are less and less today than they were years and years ago, because there's so many opportunities to do that. So anyway.
Yeah. And it's not hard to measure success. There are tools. One of the easiest ones, and I won't go into all of them right now, but one of the easiest ones is the Google Analytics on your website. Everyone probably had it set up when they talked to their website person or website people. And yet, when was the last time any of you looked at that? I don't know. What for? I don't even drive traffic to my website. Okay, so then why do you have a website? And does any of the traffic that comes to your website matter to you? It's a good question. And that's a relevant question to have. In fact, have you ever gone to visit any of those conversations where people discuss the relevance of website traffic in 2023? It's a relevant thing to go look into and have a discussion. And you can say, well, as an entrepreneur who does cooking classes to teach business, right? This is just a narrative I've been rolling with. It just totally came up with it. I think that website traffic, specifically to the landing page that I have, or to the page where I invite people to sign up for the cooking classes, looks pretty good. 45 out of 100 people who visit the page month to month over the last 90 days have actually been signing up. That's not bad, right? Those are important things to know. I'm not just flexing marketing muscles. It's a relevant question to ask. That's ROI, right? That's one tool you can ask to see how effective your thought leadership and personal branding is. And we'll get into more of those later. And this is the one I think is the most important. And I know Selby will have a lot to say on this, is the fear of vulnerability. Okay. A lot of people say, well, thought leadership doesn't work, but then they never opened up about anything personal in their lives. And again, remember what I said earlier? We're not talking about whether you believe pineapple should be on pizza. That's not relevant. That's not a relevant discussion. But you do have to tap into who you are, what you've been through. Public speakers will know this. A lot of the way public speakers develop their talks, they need to put in elements that are relevant to the story, to what they're talking about, but they need to put those elements in to create a personal branded thought leadership presentation, right? You can't be not vulnerable. You can't be all boxed up and then expect people to, who do you think has a stronger personal brand? Okay. And this is going to be a terrible example, and I'm reaching into I'm risking it all here. But who do you think has a better personal brand? Elon Musk or Vladimir Putin? Right? Let's just put that out there. One person, at least in America, seems very closed off. And the other one, even though now they both have polarization going for them. And that's another element to keep in mind. No one's indifferent about them. Everybody has an opinion about both of those people. And we could interchange this with anybody else, right? But one person we happen to know more of, we happen to see that they go with their mom to fashion galas, and then people have their opinions about that. But the point is, there are personalized elements. One person we know named their kid X10456, whatever, and everybody just calls him Baby X, right? Now, believe me, there is definitely a whole lot more interesting to Vladimir Putin. In fact, there's a podcast by the name of How to Rule the World by Benjamin. I forget the guy's last name, but it's one of the only podcasts, really. And I've got like 10 podcast tops that I listen to that will go into all of that. But that's through third parties because of this historical figure who got power, and it's a whole different thing. But the point is, if we were to just take it like the most basic face value things, one person definitely has a lot more vulnerability being shown. And that helps us connect with them a lot more. Does that make them a better world leader or this or that's up for discussion? And that's one thing, right? But now I want to turn it over to Selby. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. I want her to break down her own thoughts on this because the work that she does directly relates to this.
Yeah, I was going to interject before you turned it over to me. So yeah, there's nothing more important than your story and not necessarily your entire story, but you need to tell the story that's relevant to your brand. And that takes some things, program for creation space. There's a lot of content out there in the world. We can go on go on Google and find an answer and a course and hundreds of web pages to answer a question that we have. But really in the digital marketplace, and I'm not trying to be a digital marketer, but the same has to do with your content. If you are vulnerable, you're much more believable to your audience, and then your audience is going to be much more likely to consume your information because they trust you as the leader to take them through this problem that they're going to solve and through this transformation that they're seeking. And it's not the only way to do it, but it is the way telling your story and talking about your credibility and really being open and honest about your journey is a way that you can connect with your audience to make sure that that information is resonating with them and moving forward. So that's when I work with people to put together their programs, that is the number one thing we do is we get into your brand and the transformation and what was your transformation story, so your content is more relevant to your audience. We've heard Phillip talk about how it's so important to be relevant, but yes, you can have information over here, but it's not going to reach your audience unless there's some sort of match and there's some sort of connection there. And the first way that you can start that is by talking about your journey and being open about that. And I mean, that's kind of marketing 101, but there's not a lot of people in the thought leadership space. And there's not a lot there because not a lot of people are making that connection and being open and honest about their journey and connecting with their with their audience about the transformation that they want to make. And that's where that's where these conversations are happening, and where you not only take the relevant conversations that are happening and just discuss it and be a part of it, but you're also making that important to your audience. And that's where the magic happens. And that's why thought leadership doesn't work in some cases, because some people don't open tell their story and talk about their journey and be vulnerable, because we're entrepreneurs and we have to be in the open space. So I deal, within my publishing company too, this is one of the most challenging things for people to do when they write their business books. And in all honesty, when I published my book last year, that was one of the most challenging pieces for me, was telling my personal story and telling my personal background and the challenges that I overcame and what it taught me. And because I was scared if I told my story, then it takes away from my business. But it's all part of my business. All those thoughts and backgrounds and worldview and experiences are part of what I offer to the world and through my business. And as thought leaders, we have the opportunity to step into that space. So sometimes it takes a third party, but sometimes it's just recognizing with yourself that, hey, I need to use more of my personal story in marketing, add some of my personality to my marketing, have some more authentic things in my marketing pieces and in my organic marketing strategy that can ignite these conversations. And you want to step in the space and have these conversations about things. And that's where you can kind of start the thought leadership. And yeah, we can think of examples where that doesn't work too, but
one of the perfect examples of vulnerability. I did this I want to say maybe a week ago. It was something that I never do, right? Most people who have met me and work with me never get to find anything about my family at all. And some who I spend more time with learn a little about what happens with my family, and then even fewer know everything that's happened. And yet, as I reflected one day on the fact that I've interviewed quite literally 2,500 people, when I think about it, I'm still organizing that list of people because I was so busy doing it. I'm still going back and trying to build the list and make a clear list of who these people are, what I remember about interviewing them, and what industry they're in. But what I realized was I have this amazing opportunity that I was given to speak with so many people back to back about things that are relevant to their lives. And I said, well, who's someone I've never spoken to? And of course, very famous people came to mind, people that I admire, people that I respect. I was also reminded, I haven't called my sister. I should probably call her. I was thinking of that. And then I realized I never had a conversation as an adult with my father due to the fact that he had ALS or this or that. And I began to realize what a gift I was given, that even though I wasn't able to connect directly with my father and that he tried to fight ALS for 20 years, so that he could see his kids grow, I was still given the inverse of that as a gift, the ability to communicate effectively, powerfully. Think about that, right? That's vulnerability. That's me connecting something personal to the idea that we're trying to discuss here about thought leadership. And you see how it changes the tone. It doesn't have to be something like that, because right after that, I realized, I never tell people I used to be an actor in the business world, because then they might see me as like, oh, you were an entertainer, right? I had all these weird thoughts in my head that didn't make any sense. I talked myself out of it before I could do it. But then I thought, I've probably invested, when I did the numbers, over 10, probably $15,000 into acting classes, singing classes, Alexander technique, and all these other things. I even took radio host VJ lessons. I was a part of this thing called the American Radio Network. And it's like, welcome, everybody. We're going to give away a couple of tickets. Dial in now, 555, whatever. I took those classes, and where they underline certain things, and where you're supposed to raise inflection, pause, and all that. I did all of that, right? All of that. And then I shared about the fact that I've invested in that and realized that made me the communicator I am today. Okay. There you go. More vulnerability about things that I don't think people should know about. Why should they know about? And yet all that does is help lift up what it is I'm trying to do, which is help people understand how to communicate about who they are and why they do what they do better. And then working with Selby, help develop products and services that can prop that up, right? How's that? Just look at the way you're feeling now based on what you felt like before I shared that, and realize you can have that very same impact. And it doesn't have to be forced. It will make you even more authentic and more connected to what you're doing. Okay. So now let's look about some things as to why it does work. When thought leadership does work, what does that look like? Okay. Well, when thought leadership does work, that means that you actually can see the whole picture. You can see why Oprah Winfrey, the media mogul that she is, and the philanthropist that she became, and the strong leadership that she built, was done based on, we all know she started off working at a TV company, and nobody gave her the time of day, right? People said no to Oprah, which is hard to imagine now. But there was a time when they said that. They said no to her ideas, to what she believed in. And yet she found a way. So you understand that vision. You understand the bigger idea at work. Good, right? Then you also, hopefully, when thought leadership does work, it's also because you understand that it actually complements your existing strategies. If you look at people like Richard Branson, right? Virgin Group, okay? CEO, thought leadership. He shares experiences. He writes newsletters. Everybody knows. Has anyone here flown on Virgin Atlantic by any chance on the planes? I'm telling you, even the last row feels like a first class seat because there's plenty of space. Okay. And that's not by accident. That costs more money. They make less margins, but what they make in return for that feeling, that experience, sure, they still charge a pretty penny, but when you look at the overall costs and expenditures and the way other companies like Spirit Airlines, where they really draw the hard lines and what they can carry, or Southwest, there's a big difference in how we feel and think about them. Okay, so it does complement what you're doing. So if you understand that your thought leadership, Richard Branson being out there doing so many weird things as he does. Look at what he's allowed in terms of diversity in his workforce and how he champions that, being funky, being fresh, being cool, being you. Think about that. Okay, all that does is bring in more business. That's not the point, but the point is that it does complement what you're doing, whatever it is you're doing in life. So if you understand those two things, you're already doing good and you're on your way to seeing it really work for you. Okay. The other is whether you can be authentic and vulnerable. And we just covered that. And the most perfect example of that is Brene Brown, who literally built an entire personal brand on being vulnerable, having the courage to dare greatly, to speak out what you actually believe. If you haven't read any Brene Brown books, I really recommend them. Okay. And then, of course, offer and curate your insights. Again, Seth Godin didn't just say, hey, traditional marketing isn't working, and then wrote a book called Purple Cow, where he talks about, you should think that your product is amazing and actually design it as an amazing product. and make sure that it's amazing before you call it amazing. That might help a lot. Otherwise, you get the right press and good marketing will only help a bad product fail faster. So he took the time to curate exactly how people can understand that, the same way we did. We could have just said personal branding this, personal branding that, but we curated the experience so far just for you. You need to do the same. You have to be the person that took the time to figure it out for others. That's literally the most important thing you can do. And if you can understand that, then thought leadership is going to work for you. Okay. Now, before we go into measuring thought leadership, I want to check in with Shelby and see if she has any thoughts on so far what we've been talking about.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Move on.
All right.
No.
Now, again,
okay.
Okay. Okay. It looks like Cal.
The debater would call it the scorched earth policy or the scorched earth strategy, right, Jared?
Okay, right on. We'll have to cover that. I'm intrigued. Scorched earth. That sounds insane. Okay.
That you cover it all, so there's nothing left for me to cover.
Okay. Oh, I see.
But that's okay.
Okay.
That's all right. It means you're comprehensive.
Okay. So again, so this I think is the so now we're going to move on to measuring thought leadership, right? Which is, I think, the thing that most people are worried about when they invest in thought leadership or personal branding or the ideas that we're sort of talking about here is they say, okay, well, remember the ROI, there's no ROI in it, right? And we alluded to one tool that can help you measure that, because at the end of the day, what gets measured gets managed. Many of you have heard that thing, right? But now let's put aside conventional wisdom and that they said, and really look at, like, what does it look like to actually manage the progress, right? Because if you think that Marie Forleo didn't have a plan while she was doing this, and that she wasn't watching to make sure that there was distance being closed from point A to point Z, not even B, but point Z, and how they were tracking that progress, if we don't know what even point Z looks like, so even if it's an arbitrary goal, we want 100 more followers, right? Even if you have an arbitrary goal, you're doing better than somebody who says, let's just keep posting and see what happens. No, you need to measure things, right? So let's talk about what it looks like measuring thought leadership, okay? There are things we can do, like, for example, SEO, many of you heard. And SEO gets thrown around and it becomes this big thing. And you're like, what is SEO? And there's, like, marketers will break down, there's 4 levels to it, right? There's on-site SEO, off-site SEO, local SEO, and technical SEO. And you're like, oh, what's going on? I still don't even know what SEO is, so all the other things don't matter, right? All that means is that you've optimized anything that can be found about you online to be showing exactly what you want it to show in the places you want it to show. And then the question is, well, how do you track that? There's a bunch of tools, like, and pardon me, I'm getting itchy nose syndrome here. Google Analytics, Google Search Console. There's tools like Moz. I've happened to interview Rand Fishkin a few times. Yeah, and SEMrush. Yeah, look at that, Karina, you chimed in right away. Yes, SEMrush, just like that. SEMrush, as some people might actually say. You know, some people say SEMrush, and that's equally true. And there's even more tools than that. There are at least one new tool a day being developed for helping you track your online visibility and search engine ranking. Okay. Another aspect is social media presence and engagement, measuring growth, like followers, engagement, likes, comments, overall reach. You can easily get tools like Hootsuite. We have Twitter Analytics, which I think got deprecated when Elon Musk took over, to be honest with you. LinkedIn Analytics, Facebook Insights, right? There are so many native, even someone using the business version of Instagram, which is free, you can see how your posts are doing. You can see what's happening. You see more than the personal one, for sure. So if any of you haven't switched over at least one of your social media accounts to be able to see how your content is performing, literally the first step you can take, and it's free. Okay. But then there are other paid tools, like I said, like Hootsuite and Social Bakers and so many more. There's even one called Social Blade, which is another one that most people don't really know about, but it's a really good one if you haven't already looked at that. You can even tag what accounts you want to see follow and how their own growth is doing. It doesn't give you personal analytics, but it gives you overall what's publicly visible. Okay. And again, it's about year over year, month over month, week over week. Although anyone tracking week by week statistics needs to take a chill pill, especially when you're starting out, because you need to build data to have a point of reference first. Okay. Now we're talking about website traffic and user behavior, right? This is what we're talking about with Google Analytics. There's like tools like Hotjar and Crazy Egg, where you see the bounce rate. How many people in this chat even know what bounce rate is? Yeah, bounce rate, right? That's how how fast someone left your website after having visited a page or the website at all. Okay, so if you're an information website and your whole goal, like Wikipedia, for example, and people show up and then you see that their whole journey, thanks to Google Analytics or Hotjar or Crazy Egg, they were looking for something in particular and were clicking in like really random places and they couldn't seem to find it and then just left. What do you think the bounce rate on that high bounce rate they'd left, even though they went to multiple pages, which would usually be a good signal, but then you see it all happen in the span of 30 seconds. That's a really high bounce rate. When you get 100 people doing that, you realize that bounce rate is because people can't find relevant information on your website. That's how you measure the analytics. Whereas if your information website, like Wikipedia, and someone showed up for, let's say, pizza, and the story, the origins, and they find out how the tomato sauce was specifically designed for this, and then they go in and go, wait, I want to go deeper onto tomato sauces from pizza, and you see a relevant thread and they stay on for a very long time, and then your bounce rate is really low. That's actually a good thing, because now not only have they seen a lot of pages, but they also stayed on for a long time and then left. Okay, your website is doing its job. But most people have a website because I just need a website that's part of personal branding. Maybe, maybe not. It really depends. But again, at least there's a tool to measure that aspect of thought leadership and personal branding. We can go on further. There's content performance like BuzzSumo and Ahrefs. If you haven't looked at those tools, they help you see how to make sense of the fact that people are viewing your content and what that means and what the commentary means. BuzzSumo in particular is a pretty good one if you haven't looked at it, okay? Email marketing effectiveness. We're talking about MailChimp. That's like the easiest target. If you have a newsletter of some sort, or you plan on doing one, at least have a tool like MailChimp. And I think MailChimp is free for like the first 10,000 email subscribers, okay? That's generous. And Paul Jarvis, the guy who started that, he's got plenty of books that I recommend anyone here read if you're a business of one, okay? Because, yeah, he has teams for MailChimp, but a lot of his businesses, it was just him. So if any of you are a business of one, look into Paul Jarvis. That's just me throwing extra value there. ConvertKit, again, Klaviyo. There's so many tools for email marketing effectiveness and automation that you can track things. Keep that in mind. And yeah, that's all these tools that you've heard of, they're helping you measure your effectiveness, not just in digital marketing, but in your thought leadership and personal branding. Media coverage. Okay. If no one in here, let me rephrase that. If anyone in here doesn't have Google alerts set up for their name yet, and you're paying for PR, you're doing it all wrong. Okay. Or if you're paying for SEO and you have an SEO team, you need to set up your Google alerts on your name or your company's name today. And if you don't know how to do that, get in touch with either Selby or I, and we'll make sure that happens, okay? But you need to have that set up. Google Alerts at a minimum, or you can use a tool like Mention or Muckrack, but they are there, okay? So you see how there's actually things set up so that you can measure the success of what it is that you're doing. And the list could go on with tools, and I don't want to bore you with these tools, but they are there. And if you want a list of all that, we can talk about putting all this together for you later. But I just want to show you that there are ways to track the progress. So when people say, oh, it doesn't work, well, that depends on your definition, and that depends on whether or not you're actually tracking something. So you see the tangibility of what you're building in the ether. Okay. So what is, generally speaking, and this isn't, by the way, our cost, but what might you be looking at in general in investing in this? Because if you think that Marie Forleo was able to build B School, Marie TV, her book, Everything is Figure Outable, or if you think Seth Godin was able to write several books and they did it all for free at no cost at all, You think Elon Musk? We all know he didn't do it for free, right? Coco Chanel. Okay, you see him get it doesn't happen for free. And I'm not saying that it has to be super expensive either. Anyone in business knows the whole point is you get the best deal you can when you can. And that's respectable. And any true business person will respect that. Right. And that's called the art of the deal. And you can talk about that later. But the point is, we do need to understand like what a ballpark is looking at, right? So keep in mind that overall, any entrepreneur starting to intentionally develop their personal brand, and you can see I wrote it there in case you don't want to listen to me, but it's just crucial to sort of emphasize what your actual goal is and what the most critical thing is to getting you off the ground or getting you to the next step. Okay. And it's not always going to be a one-time cost. Some things will be, but some things will be ongoing costs. So if we're looking at the lowest end, and keep in mind, these numbers are hypotheticals. Okay. It's just a ballpark. If you're talking about basic, I mean basic, you're not going to love the website. Okay. But it's going to be a website, right? You know what I mean? That probably $500, but I don't recommend you go that route. I'm just setting that anchor for you there. Okay. But I really recommend you invest a lot more than that. Okay. So you're looking at a website development, especially if that's going to be the hub. Because if you're the kind of person that just relies on social media to be your place and then that social network disappears, well, we hate to say we told you so. Okay. So your basic website, sure. I guess you can get it. And all these prices are, I guess you can get away with it. Okay. I guess you can get away with $100 personal branding, whatever that means. Content creation, I guess you can pay someone on Fiverr or Upwork $500 a month if that's really where you're at. Although, again, these are all, I guess you could get away with it. Social media management tools, probably like $300 almost, right? Email marketing, again, MailChimp really hooks you up. Public relations and media outreach. I personally have worked with, having been on Entrepreneur and Inc. magazine as a podcast host, met a lot of PR agents. And I can't think of any good ones, the ones that actually stayed in business long term, that are charging actually $1,000. There are some. They are out there. What they can get you for that, though, you need to manage your expectation on what that's actually going to do for you. Okay. That might get you some SEO juice, but not the best kind of SEO juice. Okay. And then professional development, meaning like attending things like this, right? This was free. Okay. But some people out here probably would have charged $100 for this. Easy. So keep that in mind. So you're looking at like, even at a minimum, if you were just going to launch, you're already looking at $2,500, right? And this is just a ballpark price. If you had all those things, and that's like you really being like balling on a budget, as they say, right? On the high end, it could totally jump up to $30,000 easy. And we're talking about like a 7K website, right? Professional branding, meaning a brand guide, graphics. You're looking at content creation on a regular basis of $5,000. Of course, it's important to be able to find out how that is supporting as a business. Again, this is where Shelby comes in, right? Your content creation and turning that into a business that can actually support itself. It'll feed itself. Anyone who knew what they were doing found a way to make it all feed itself. Think about it. Elon Musk sold a flamethrower. What does that have to do with going to space? But it made money and it was in brand, right? It made alcohol and called it, I think he called it Musk just because, right? People are trying to convince him to make donuts because he said he eats a donut every day on Twitter. And now he wants to, now they're trying to convince him to start boring donuts for his boring company to create money. If Elon Musk started a coffee and put iodine salt, because iodine salt, when we made the choice to put iodine into our water, showed that our IQ increased as a society, and he decided to do that, people would probably buy his coffee, and that would probably help him make up for the money that he lost with Twitter. Do you see how you have to diversify your portfolio, productize, and develop things, right? Again, social media marketing, a more realistic look, if you're going high quality, is probably like $1,200 a month for that, right? And you're going to want to invest for that for 12 months at least. Whatever you're doing, you're going to want to at least try it for a whole year, right? Public relations and media outreach, definitely more along the $8,000 to $10,000 to get on Forbes or Entrepreneur. And if anybody's selling it for less than that, then they're buying it from somebody else who actually has a relationship. Okay. And professional development, again, obviously for some people, $30,000 is a budget, like a balling on a budget, believe it or not. Right. And everybody's in different places. There's no judgment. I'm not trying to introduce scarcity here. I'm trying to give you a ballpark. of what this looks like, so that all of you understand. And you think Marie Folio invested at least $30,000 into what she's doing over time? Anybody? How much do you think someone like Marie Forleo, right? Because we can go into Coco Chanel, but that, like, that's a household name. There's definitely more than $30,000 there. Seth Godin, he runs Alt MBA. If any of you have looked at that, his whole program is about helping develop you into a business owner in the non-traditional route. Does that sound like his brand? Non-traditional? Hey, marketing doesn't look like that, right? It actually looks like this. He's saying, hey, business school shouldn't look like that. It should actually look like this. Very on brand. And he developed a product or a service to support that. Okay? That's the way that looks. So I just want to give you a ballpark, but always keep in mind that a lot of these are highly simplified, and more than likely, most of these costs are going to be ongoing costs, not one-time costs. And so it's important for you to be prepared for that and for you to find ways to develop. And that means working with Selby specifically, right? I can help you with the core stuff and get all your narrative and help you line up what your thought leadership is going to be about to begin with. That's what I do as an interviewer. Right? But Shelby's going to be able to help you turn that into a business. That's her whole jam.
I was just going to say, just to add to that, I work in the publishing space and the course creation space, the program creation space. It's all the same ideas. It's just productizing it in different ways. So Tony Robbins, think of all the big coaches that have books and coaching programs and live retreats and all things. It's all the same information. It's just in his brand box or in their brand box, and it's all associated with that brand. And every time Tony Robbins comes out with a new speaker series or, whatever product, his followers are typically going to buy that because it's all part of his brand. So same thing, a lot of people are doing that, but just think about just your movement, your idea, how many different ways you can make an asset out of those things. And also think that once you create the asset, you could sell it and you can scale at that point. There's just a lot of different ways that you can go around that. Think about how to make an asset out of your idea and to sell it to multiple audiences. So
absolutely. Everyone in here has at least a book in them, right? That much is true. Everyone. And then you combine that with your actual professional experience. And now we're stepping into what Selby does, right? Because now we're going to map that out and see how many things we can make. For some people, it might be relevant to develop a perfume. It might actually truly be relevant to who you are and what you do. And once you have one customer, that customer will likely want to buy from you if you have something else that's also relevant to their problems, right? So the question is, a lot of people are busy trying to find new customers. What about the customers you've already served? What else can you offer them? Or are they just transactional to you? And then if that is the case, then you fell in love with the wrong thing. You should be falling in love with the problem that you're solving, the discussion that you're having at length with people, not the money. And everybody needs money. Goes without saying. But there's a real problem right now in a world full of a lot of noise and a lot of copycats, of people being afraid to be themselves, of being vulnerable, of standing out, of having an opinion that's actually substantial, like there's substance behind the opinion, right? And that problem can be solved and turned into a business at the same time. That's what we're letting you know here, okay? So that's all the value. We're about to open it up to the Q&A, okay? Before we do that, I just want you to know, because you signed up to this call,